Hey there, I'm Dusty and I'm making a social farm game. Yes, this is another devlog about an indie farm game. But before I draw your conclusions, allow me to introduce myself. I'm a front-end web developer, which is a nice way to say that I paint buttons for a living. I also do live coding streams and wanted to do something different. So I had this idea of a game floating around my mind for a while, and despite have tried both Unity and Unreal, I never made a real game. So here's the pitch. Do you remember those old social media games like Farmville and Dragon City? It was so much fun interacting with your friends, but now those games are pretty much dead and have been replaced by mobile games like Clash of Clans and Heyday, and while those games can be fun, they just don't have that same focus on social interaction anymore. That's why I'm creating Fazendoka. I want to build a game like a modern version of Happy Harvest, where you can plant and take care of your crops, watch them grow over time, and interact with your friends' farms, but adapted to modern standards. So in the future, I also want you to be able to see your friends' characters in real time and play together on the same farm. So let's get to work! I decided to use Unreal Engine 5 for this project. I don't have a lot of experience with it, and it might sound like overkill for such a simple project, but I am quite comfortable working with it, so that's what I chose. So, the first step was to create a new project. I used the top-down template. Since I want the game to also work on mobile, I also want very simple controls, like how you have them in Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. So I just had to adjust the camera a little bit, and it was pretty much done. The first thing I needed for making the main mechanics was a grid system that we could spawn dirt plots and crops. So I made a grid actor that will spawn these grid cell actors repeatedly on any size that I want. And then I made these grid cells have an interactable interface so I can add some logic for when we click on them. To test this, I made it change its material to resemble a dirt plot. Saving the farm state on the player's device is not ideal for this project, as it is meant to be a social game. Other people will be able to visit your farm, so all its data must be saved on a server. To solve this, I decided to set up a REST API for the game's backend. What this means is that the server code will be separate from the game code, and for each and every action the player takes, they will have to make an HTTP request to the API, so it can validate if that action is valid, update the state on the database, and tell the player if the request was successful or not. So, instead of having a constant connection with a server that is running 24/7, like most games do, we just have to call the server when we want to perform an action. Something that is a problem is that we need to wait for the server to return if the action is valid before actually performing the action, and this causes a very noticeable lag. What we can do to solve this is just assume the action is valid and just spawn the dirt plot actor. Later, when the server returns a success message, we don't need to do anything. But if it returns an error, we just destroy the actor. This is called client-side prediction, and is used in many games, and is how I'm handling all the API requests in Fazendoka. And if you're wondering, I'm using TypeScript for the server language, SvelteKit for the framework, and Prisma for handling a PostgreSQL database. This choice is also just a matter of the stack I feel the most comfortable working with. Alright, so this gets plowing dirt covered. Next, I want to implement planting. We can't see our inventory right now, so I manually added a radish to the database and hard-coded the plant action to plant radish seeds. I created a generic crop actor with 3 empty meshes for each growth stage and a radish actor that extends it but with its own meshes. I also created a data table with the seed ID and its corresponding actor so that we can spawn the crops using the plant ID. I don't really like the solution, and maybe positioning everything in Blender and exporting the meshes for each crop stage would be a better solution. I already had this radish model made months ago, predicting that someday I would make this game, so I'm still learning Blender. Anyways, I would love to hear any tips you might have on this. As a front-end web developer, I find the UMG UI designer so hard to use, but I really wanted to show the farm storage items on screen because I already coded it in the backend, so I added a button for each item in inventory, and when you click it, you hold it, as you can see on the text on the top of the player's head. So now I can plant the seeds based on what the player is holding. I then made a basic hotbar for the tools. For now we have a cursor to represent nothing, and a hole that will toggle the grid visibility when you hold it. Now it's time for harvesting. First, to know if a crop is ready, we just have to check if the date it should be grown has already passed. So I added a harvesting tool to the hotbar that does just that. I'm not too sure what this tool will actually be, but maybe gardening gloves, I don't know. Then I also added a watering can that changes the dirt material to make it look wet and will update the date the crop will be grown by a little bit earlier, making the crop grow faster, but it can only be used once in a while. At this point, we still can't see the crops growing. That's because the server only needs to know when they are fully grown. It doesn't care about the in-between. So what I did was adding a timer that will check the growth state of each crop each second. It does so by checking when the crop was planted, the current date and time, and when it will finish growing. With these dates, we can evaluate the percentage of growth and then show the right stage mesh. And we can now also use this timer to check if the plot should still be wet. So, after working on the base mechanics for Fazendalka for a while, I really wanted to share my progress with a devlog. However, I wasn't happy with how the game looked at this point, and I know this is not important right now, but it would be really hard to make a great thumbnail and make the game even slightly recognizable for future episodes. So I decided to work on the appearance a bit, but didn't want to invest too much time in it since the mechanics were my main priority. I decided to work on the scenario, so I made a little draft first of how I want the layout to be. I plan to have a road on the left, a river on the bottom, and you will be able to expand your farm later in the game to the top and right. So maybe just some trees and an invisible wall will do. In the future, I want the road to have a parked truck that you can put your items and have them sold in the city, and the river to have fishes you can catch. So, on Unreal, I changed the ground material with this Animal Crossing grass pattern I found on DeviantArt and started playing around, trying to recreate my ideas from the draft. I also made the plots bigger and added a little gap between them. Of course, this is not final at all. I like the size since it makes the farm look huge, but the character looks quite small in comparison. I'm not too worried about it right now, since I plan to add my own character model later. However, I'm not sure how this grid size will work with smaller objects like fences, so I might need to adjust it later on. Overall, I'm loving how the game is turning out to be. It's given, but I still have a lot to do and many ideas to explore. I have quite an extensive list of things that I want to do now and ideas I would love to work in the future, and I'm always checking some of those items out of my list live on Twitch, so you're welcome to join us. I'm currently working on the buy and sell systems and sketching some UI concepts, and I'm looking forward to share more updates in future videos. So, if you are loving the Fazendalka project until this point and want to see more of me in my new game dev era, please subscribe and leave any feedback or questions you might have in the comments below. I would love to read them. That's all from me, thanks for watching and see you next time!